Thank you very much for the introduction, and I'd like to say it's wonderful to be back in Melbourne, and thank you for being invited to speak at this conference. I've learnt such a lot, and I hope that you can learn something from my talk today. So is it possible to provide quality nutrition with limited supplies? Well, I think it is. So I'm going to talk about our Australian dietary guidelines versus the recommended guidelines that we talk about for Prader-Willi syndrome. I'm going to give you just a little bit of background on the evidence, and then I'll give you my 10 top tips for the Prader-Willi diet, and then just, putting it all together, and just a little bit on establishing good behaviours, because I wouldn't say I'm the expert in that area. You've heard such a lot today from the previous speakers. So from the beginning, so growth is often poor for your children under the age of 2, and at birth the infants tend to be of normal length and are either normal weight or they're underweight. And so we've heard that poor sucking ability may lead to failure to thrive. But despite this, we really still need to keep our energy intake limited. Hyperphagia can develop from the age of 18 months. So when we estimate energy requirements, we estimate them to be 50 to 60% less for normal developing children. And that, as you know, is because of the loss of the less lean body mass and the increased fat mass. So it's really important to establish healthy habits from birth because it provides the foundation for life. So key things to know and do. So I think it's really important as parents that you have to have excellent food knowledge. So you really have to be so trained up in that, and that's part of the role of the dietitian to give you some guidance on that. You have to provide meals and snacks that are nutrient dense, not energy dense, because if they're energy dense, you know that will lead to unwanted weight gain, and the children won't get the nutrients that they need in such a small amount of food. You've got to establish good routines around eating, such as meal and snack times, eating at the table, and obviously eating their own food. You know it's important not to keep any junk in the home, and another important point is you have to become learned at label reading. And label reading doesn't just mean, understanding what does light mean, what does low sugar mean. It really means having a good understanding of the energy content of foods and the energy content of snacks. So if we just get back to the basics of our food, just a bit of nutrition, and you may already know this, but I'm going to go over it anyway. So we start our basic macronutrients are our carbohydrates, which we know as our starchy foods, so grains and breads, rice and cereals, legumes and pasta. And then we've got our sweet carbohydrate foods, which is cake, sugar, juice, the fruit sugar that's in fruit and lollies, and also some snacks. Now, in everyday metabolism, it's a key fuel for our muscle, so we need it in certain amounts. Then there's protein, which is for those that are non-vegetarian, it's all your meat, your flesh foods and your dairy foods, and other non-flesh foods are nuts and legumes. And proteins are used for muscle growth and repair, so bear in mind that children with Prader-Willi syndrome don't have that as much muscle growth unless they're, obviously when they're taking growth hormone. And in healthy subjects, there is some evidence that having more protein in the diet will help to keep you feeling full. And the other thing about protein foods is that they're good sources of iron, zinc and calcium, so you don't want those limited in your child's diet. And then there's fat, of course, and we've heard a lot about fat, over the last 30 years about the low-fat message, but most of us know that that hasn't worked. We need to have some certain amounts of fat in our diet, and I'll talk about that later. But fat basically comes from oil, margarines, butter. There's fat in avocado. Fat's in a lot of our fast foods, our takeaway foods, biscuits and cakes. So our Australian Guide to Healthy Eating, this is our new plate model. Has anyone seen that before, just for the healthy individuals? Hands up. A few of you have. Well, that's the way we tell adults and children who are healthy, that are population-based, how to eat. We assume that those children are doing an hour of physical activity a day. That's what it's estimated on. So it's higher energy requirements for those children. And it's as a plate, and you can see that most of the food here is coming from your carbohydrates. But funnily enough, I find it quite bizarre, the same amount they recommend from our vegetables. And then we've got our protein and our dairy foods, and then you've got your your sort of extra foods just in very small amounts. So what we use at the Children's Hospital at Westmead, and I work in a weight management program, so I use this for the model of care for the weight management patients, but also for the Prader-Willi children. We do it as well, and we seem to be getting some good results. So the actual versus the desired macronutrient description. So when you look at the plate model, what it equates to for our diet, we basically, most of us eat about 60 to 70% of our food as carbohydrates. We have smaller amounts of protein, and we have about 28 to 30% of fat. So the average Australian diet isn't actually that high in fat. It's the type of fats that people are eating that aren't so good. Now, the goal for macronutrient distribution in Prader-Willi syndrome is just to moderate the carbohydrate. It's not a low carbohydrate diet, so don't get me wrong when we talk about modifying carbs. It's not an Atkins type of diet. It's not a high-fat diet. But we're giving a little bit more protein at the expense of carbohydrate. And why do we do that? There's evidence around it, but basically the long and the short of it is if we look at food biochemically, we really want to reduce that response to insulin, that high glucose response, which is more likely to result in fat deposition, and obviously that's what we're trying to avoid. So taken another way, I have to thank the Diabetes Association for this. It's their healthy food pyramid, and I think it's really quite useful because what it's got at the bottom are the vegetables, and for any healthy given diet, eating vegetables is of utmost importance. So I like the fact that it's there at the bottom, and vegetables, as you mostly know, as you would know, don't give they give lots of nutrients, but they don't give calories. So that's what's good about them, except for your potato and your sweet potato. And in this healthy food pyramid, they're put up in this group, which they should be because they are a carbohydrate food. And then you've got your protein, and at the top you've got your minimal food. So another way of looking at it is, let's look at it as a plate, and to thank Australian Meat and Livestock for this slide. Basically, it's a really useful model to use, and probably so many of you are doing it already, is that if you're providing vegetables as half the plate, then you're providing lots of nutrients without providing calories. And then you've got your protein, but I like to think that we can reduce the carbohydrates a little bit more, because I don't think it's good for Prader-Willi syndrome to be giving half the amount as carbs and half the amount as proteins, because you won't get the nutrients that they need, and they'll just get more of a increase in or generally speaking, you might get a higher increase in blood glucose, which can lead to fat deposition. So leading on from there, is there any evidence? There's quite a lot of evidence, there's a lot of studies that look at what's the best macronutrient distribution for adults and children who need to lose weight. And, it's this debacle as to whether it's low protein, is it going to be high protein, is it going to be low fat, high carbohydrate, low carbohydrate. Well, then there's lots of papers showing that reducing carbohydrate and increasing protein does help in weight management for the average population. But when it comes to Prader-Willi syndrome, there aren't many papers out there, but we did find this study, which is a really good one. I think it was done in about 2008. And it's a reduced energy intake, well-balanced diet, improves weight control in children with Prader-Willi syndrome. It's from the USA. So I'll just take you through it. So they had 63 children aged 2 to 10 years with Prader-Willi syndrome, and all the children with their families were advised to go on, a reduced, basically a little bit less in the carbohydrate, which is the model we propose, with a bit more protein and some fibre. We mustn't forget the benefits of fibre. And what they did pre-study was they looked at body fat, and they did that after the study, and they looked at resting energy expenditure just to get the requirements for how much the children needed to eat. And then they took it was quite complex. They took 3-day diet histories before the study started, and then they took them approximately every 6 months for the 5-year duration of the study. And from those diet histories, they could calculate energy, carbohydrate, protein, and fat. And when they looked at the results, 33 adhered to the diet. Now, what's really interesting is that the energy intake for the children who were on the modified diet was exactly the same as the children who weren't on the modified diet. So they ate the same amount of calories. So that's really important to know. But those who ate the modified diet had a much lower percentage of body fat, which is great to see. And they also had the lower BMI-Z scores, which is a measure of the BMI. It's how we measure BMI in children. And you remember hearing about the standard deviation, but basically the bigger the standard deviation away from zero, the bigger is the child. So these children who are on the modified diet kept their weight in control. Those who didn't, did not. And what was also interesting is they looked at respiratory quotient, and one of the speakers yesterday mentioned this respiratory quotient is how we metabolise, you know, it's sort of looking at mixed foods and whether we're metabolising fat or protein more, or carbohydrates, sorry, not protein. And the lower you get your respiratory quotient, the better it is. Now, we don't measure respiratory quotients in our families, in our patients, of course, because it's usually done under research conditions, but it is interesting to see that this dietary intake did reduce the respiratory quotient, which is a good thing. Okay, so my 10 top tips that I would give to you today is, of course, you know, breakfast is compulsory. Starting off the day with breakfast, and you'll know that every meal in the family, for a family with Prader-Willi syndrome, doesn't go unnoticed anyway. So basically, there's some breakfast ideas, and you can see that if you're putting some carbohydrate with protein, you can balance out your protein and carbs together. So that gives them a good start to the day. Obviously, the second thing you all know all about, because you are the parents of children with Prader-Willi syndrome, is that your portions have to be smaller. And for this, we used aged matched, you know, portions. So we know the energy requirements for different ages. We work those out, and we can modify our portions to reach what is needed to reduce weight gain. What some families find easier to do is actually, you know, use half milk, half water when they do their mix. Then the child thinks they're getting more, but they're actually not. That's a good tip. Always put carbs and protein together. So this is a key rule, because if you're doing your protein and carbohydrates together, you know then that macronutrient distribution will be what we're aiming for. So example there is, you know, having half a cup of baked beans on a slice of toast for breakfast, or having a snack, which is a tablespoon of hummus with 2 to 3 wafer thins. And the fourth point is, obviously the snacks can be part of a calorie-controlled diet if they're given in controlled amounts. And there are some snacks around. I mean, there's a lot that we just wouldn't want to be given to any of our children, but there's also, you know, some that are out there that, and you might balk at the idea of chocolate, but it is something like Jarrah hot chocolate. I'm not recommending it as you know, I don't have shares in the company or anything like that, but at least you're looking at a very, very low calorie drink that the child can have and still have it with half a piece of fruit. And then the fifth point, of course, is understanding labels. And I think it's quite difficult to be a real, you know, extraordinaire when it comes to labelling, because it's not that easy. And food companies do have a way of tricking us into thinking that, well, that must be quite a good food, particularly when it comes to things like if it's a light food or if it's a reduced or a low-fat food. Does that mean it's really low in calories and low in energy? Because often, sometimes, you know, for example, in a low-fat fruit yogurt, it may have more sugar than a normal fruit yogurt because they've added some sugar there to boost the taste. So talking about labels is another half an hour in itself, but just as parents, it's just being aware that knowing label reading is really important. And 6, when you're having carbohydrates in the diet, you probably know about the glycemic index. It's just good to have low GI foods because it will just help with slowing down eating as well. You know, just whole grain bread takes a lot longer to chew than, say, white bread, for example. And then the lunchbox, we recommend 6 things. So obviously the water, this is obviously for school age children, always to have water. Wraps are quite good instead of giving bread, because it's half the amount of carbohydrate, then it's half the calories, and with a measured amount of lean protein. So obviously a wrap that just doesn't have a spread on it, which isn't particularly good, not very healthy, but put some protein in there. A half to 1 piece of fruit. Obviously the extra carrots and cucumber sticks to bulk up the diet, and the small, if packaged snack foods are a part of your meal plans, then a small packaged snack food such as, you know, a 30-gram packet of popcorn. Obviously we've heard about routine and knowledge and the child knowing that that's going to happen, so if that's part of what you're doing at home, then there's no harm in that. And the final thing is adding in a little bit of dairy, like a small cheese stick or some crackers and cheese, or a small plain yogurt, because that again will give them a bit of extra protein and the calcium that's needed. So tip number 8 is afternoon tea. Routine's really important. This goes for any child in any family. Get them to come in, get changed. If having afternoon tea is a part of their meal plan, offering a high protein snack and with some vegetables. And you might have field rules. Well, this is afternoon tea. We don't eat again until dinner time. That's fair enough. But in some families, they have been wanting to know what can be given, and we know the only extras are vegetables of any sort. And then dinner. This is your plate model. Your 50 to 100 grams of lean meat, fish or chicken, or a non-meat food. And obviously the 50 to 100 gram depends on the age of the child and what weight we are aiming for. The quarter to half a cup of carbohydrates. So it's actually not a lot of rice, potato, pasta, and half a plate of vegetables or salad for the bulk. Now that's obviously quite a westernised diet, but it just gives you an example of how you can meet that macronutrient composition. And then, of course, point 10 is giving, foods that take a lot longer to chew. So eating isn't over in an instant, and obviously things like vegetables and salads will help with that. Okay, so the next slide is just achieving the right balance. So this was a meal plan that was done for a young girl of mine who was 3 years old, and this young girl has been going really well on this type of meal plan, and as we heard this morning, the meal plan, you can see it, it's very tiny up here, is written out. They're typed up for the families, and some of them families like to put it in their own writing. Some of the children that are older like to write it out themselves. It's put there on the fridge, and you can see that there's still quite a lot of food there. It's not overdoing it, but it's giving quite a good balance, and it's giving your proteins and your carbohydrates and your fats in the right proportion. So for this 3-year-old, it's a 720 calories a day, with 25% of the energy coming from protein, carbohydrates 50%, and the fat was 25%. And I meant to mention with most of our children, we do recommend fish oils to help with the good balance of fat. And the diet also, when we run it through FoodWorks, there wasn't needing at this stage for a multivitamin supplementation, because what was good to see is that the child was able to get adequate iron and calcium, and also zinc, which are vital nutrients for any child. Oh, I just put this in here. These are actually 2 lunch boxes that I've had some of my families take photographs for me, and I just thought I'd put up there and ask you. Both are okay, but would anyone like to say which one they think might be better just for the balance? The green one. The green one, because of I'm a real pusher of vegetables, yeah, so this was just some broccoli. So that was a really good lunchbox, and this one isn't too bad. You can see that's the dairy that's been given, just a small Devondale milk. And I would assume in there's some protein, I would hope so, and hopefully there's some cheese in that rice cake too. So both of them are pretty good, but was just seeing whether you thought one was better than the other. Now, the next section, I said to you all I would mention a little bit about fat. Fat it's an important nutrient because of that brain development and, to keep us well insulated. But we need to ensure we're eating the good types of fat. So I'm assuming you all know that the saturated fat is not the best type of fat because it is more implicated in cardiovascular problems. And so it's not just the animal fat there that we can see, but it's also palm oil. So in most of your packaged snack foods, and when you, I was just going to say get takeaway food, but obviously, hopefully that's not happening. But takeaway foods use an enormous amount of palm oil. It's cheaper, it's easy to process, and that palm oil will be listed on the ingredients as vegetable oil because they can call it that. But it isn't a good fat, it's very high in saturated fat. So the better fats are obviously your monounsaturated fat, which is avocado and olive oil and peanuts in small amounts, and then your long-chain polyunsaturated fats, so your omega-3s and your omega-6s. So your omega-6s will come from your fish and your fish oil, but the omega-3s will come as well. Sorry, the omega-6s are your polyunsaturated fats, I said that incorrectly, that come more from your safflower oils and sunflower oil, whereas your omega-3s come from fatty fish and walnuts. So just really small amounts are needed. So you might use a little bit of olive oil in cooking. You might have some oily fish twice a week or something like that, and that way you'll get a balance of fats for the developing child. Now, drinks and snacks. This isn't a good picture. This child's just going to town on all those different snacks, but I suppose I'm putting this in there to say, can snacks be included as part of a balanced meal plan? And, I'm of the belief that if families find it, convenient and they want to know if there's particularly a small packaged snack that could be put in the lunchbox, then I'll work with the families to do that. But I definitely don't push them. It's only if it's wanted. And of the ones, I just put that there to show you how, it's a mind games out there, how difficult it is when you're saying when you need to read labels and understand energy intake. But, if someone has a bowl of chips, that's like 1,090 kilojoules, which is about 200 calories. So, you just can't measure that. But interestingly enough, there are some snacks like popcorn, which will provide not much else, but just a minimal amount of kilojoules. And then we look at the kilojoules that are coming from Coke and fruit juice and water. That's just been put in there for a little bit of a different stand. So our balanced snack choices. So yogurt, plain yogurt is really good, and Paul's make a very good plain yogurt in a very small container for younger children. Aldi make Brookley, and there's no sugar at all. If you are families that do use artificial sweeteners, then Forme obviously is going to be the brand of choice for yogurts. There are whole grain crackers and cheese. There's a lot of options out there. There's lots of cheese sticks that some of the children like to have. Corn crackers are quite good. And fruit obviously is a balanced snack in small amounts. And I just put there with the skim milk to drink with it, so you're just not having fruit on its own. Dried fruit isn't great because it's got a huge amount of sugar. And are there any Prader-Willi friendly foods? Well, there are a few around, and by friendly I mean they're not free, okay? They're just friendly. They're something that you can use as part of a balanced meal plan. So the mountain breads, mentioned those before. They're quite good. Some of these wafer thins are good. They don't contain any palm oil, and they're very, very low in carbohydrate. some families may use diet yogurts and desserts, and these mini ice, well, they're paddle pops, but paddle pops aren't terribly high in calories. They're only about 60 to 80, but there are some very mini ice creams. As you know, it's about structure, and it's about it's not about the unknown. So if that was going to be given, you would obviously have discussed it and gone through all that with your child. Are there some danger foods? Yes, there are things that really it's important to keep right away from. Shouldn't be in the home, shouldn't be given to any child at all. So rice crackers, these instant noodles. Rice crackers only because I think if you have rice crackers, they're easy to eat like packets of chips. You just can't stop. Something like the corn thins are a little bit better because at least corn has a lower GI. The mac and cheese, obviously fruit juice, soft drinks, lollies and chocolates, cheese, full cream milk, nuts and dried fruit, and all your spreads, jam, Nutella, peanut butter and honey. Things that should be not in the home or be locked away. Okay, haven't got long to go. And the free foods, you'd know all about these: berries, frozen peas, vegetable sticks, salsas, and some of your diet products. And the last section is on establishing good routines. I won't read all of that out because basically I'm just repeating what has already been said, and you know as parents how important this is to advocate for the whole family to have a strict routine and structure to the day. So the same time every day for meals and snacks, etc. This slide here was I just put here because I found this quite interesting, and what it showed was we've heard about positive reinforcement for good behaviour, and what some families do is to providing structure, but it does allow some flexibility, is having your child be involved with his or her meal plan, because they at some stage will want to have, they will want to know what's in their lunchbox. They will want to have a decision in what they're going to be eating. So it's quite good if they can get involved in the portion exchange system, because it gives them some flexibility and gives them a bit of autonomy to what they're going to eat. And it also will allow for some treats, although sometimes foods, which helps us as families to be realistic and to normalise eating. And this one was a study that said it was quite a novel approach. You might think it's a little controversial, but for most of us, you know, we obviously want to avoid having to go to the supermarket with our children who have got Prader-Willi syndrome, but sometimes it just can't be avoided. And this novel strategy was shown to work, and it was promising that the child was learnt to know that if there was a more desirable food to come later, it would prevent the immediate food consumption at the supermarket and the tantrum at the time. So in the supermarket, the child sees the lolly and wants to have it, and the parents say, if you don't have it now, remember you won't be able to have your ice cream, or it might be your yogurt that was part of your meal plan tonight. And it may circumvent that tantrum at the time and may stop the child from wanting the lolly. Whether in practice that works, I don't know, but I thought I'd just put it out there. They were saying in the study that that was a new approach they were taking. And finally, I think it's really important to talk about preventing the weight gain, because it's really important that we see our families quite constantly. And if you're part of a multidisciplinary clinic, then that's fantastic. If not, just getting to see the health professional, particularly the dietitian, every 6 months at the outset, going on to, you know, yearly as they get older, because it's always there are always new types of foods out there that might like to be tried within the structure of the family. Other ways, obviously, to prevent weight gain is that structured activity and reducing incidental activity, trying to get the whole family involved in exercise instead of just the child, and go on outings that involve everyone and involve exercise, limiting the use of screens, because they just most of the TV shows have food ads for children anyway, so they're not good. obviously strict adherence to meal plans, and providing the opportunity to have vegetables by always having them available, and the monitoring weight. So it's really important to monitor weight, and in the clinic we suggest to the families that they do, when they first start out, that they monitor weight at least every 2 weeks up to monthly, and then as the children get older, that they are monitoring their weight, you know, at least every month to ensure that they're heading on the right track for their weight percentiles. Okay, I think I've said enough, so thank you all for listening, and I don't know if there's any time for questions at the panel. Okay, thank you.